Welcome to the Josh Hall Web Design Show. Helping you build better websites and create a web design business that gives you freedom and a lifestyle you love.
Hey friends, great to have you here for episode 195, where I am so excited to bring on a 3-time author, a podcaster, a keynote speaker, a coach, an online entrepreneur, somebody who's been doing online business for quite a while and has learned a lot about the idea of, or the importance of, free time. This is Jenny Blake, and her brand new book, get this, is called Free Time, Lose the Busy Work, Love Your Business. If you're anything like me, I'm guessing that sounds awesome and you are intrigued, just like I was when I first heard Jenny on a couple podcasts I listened to and got to know her brand a little more. I want you to lose the busy work of your business and love your business. And that really boils down to creating free time. And in this episode, Jenny and I have a really interesting conversation about how to get free time back, and not only your personal work-life balance, so just working less and having more time for your family, friends, hobbies, whatever you want to do, but also this concept of freeing time up in your business so that you're not just hustling and doing the busy work, but you have a schedule in days and weeks and time that you can actually work on your business, or I found just having a more sustainable pace and just not having to hustle, quote unquote, so much. This idea of free time will filter in, I think, in every aspect of your life, both professional and work and personal as well. So I'm really, really excited to hear how Jenny's thoughts help you in your business. So we're going to dive into this topic of free time. I'm really excited for you, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. If you have any big takeaways from this episode, or if you have any free time ideas of yourself that you've implemented in your business, let me know. There's a couple different ways you can do that. I'm really active right now on Instagram. If you want to go follow me and connect with me on Insta, you can just go to joshhall.co/Instagram, which will zip you over there. And then if you want to go to the post where this podcast is at joshhall.co/195, you can leave a comment. I do read all those, and more often than not, I get back to those as well. So I would love to hear your thoughts on free time, how you've implemented it, and how this episode helps you out as well. So without further ado, here is Jenny Blake, author of Free Time, Lose the Busy Work, Love Your Business. Be sure to go check her out after this episode at itsfreetime.com. And if you ever get in touch with her, just tell her Josh sent you. But for now, here's Jenny. Let's talk free time. Jenny, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for taking some time to chat. And I'm so pumped to chat with you for a little while here.
Likewise. Thank you, Josh. You have such explosive energy. I love it.
Explosive energy. I've never heard that before, but I'll take it. I have learned to get a little more energetic with podcast interviews because I feel like no one wants to listen to a boring conversation.
No. You have like a classic, almost radio DJ. It's awesome. It's really refreshing. I don't mean explosive in a bad way. I mean yes, yeah. I feel like I just had a cup of coffee. This is awesome.
Oh, that's so cool to hear. Well, what a segue to this topic of a very, very energetic idea for me, which is free time. I'm so excited to pick your brain about this idea of free time. You have a new book called Free Time. Lose the Busy Work, Love Your Business. Count me in. I'm so excited. I have not had a chance to read it yet. My family and I are actually, at the time of recording this, just a week out from moving into a new home. So this is the last call I'm doing for a couple weeks. Little chaotic, but once we get all settled in, this is the top of my reading list because I love this idea. We all struggle with it as entrepreneurs. Before we dive in, Jenny, I would love to know, when somebody asks you what you do, before we get into this topic of free time, what do you tell them? Just the average person. What do you tell them what you do?
I love that you're asking this. I want to know your answer too. I used to say author just because everything in my life and business always stems from my books. Free Time is my third book. Now I say I'm an author and podcaster because podcasting, as you probably know, takes so much more of my time in a day-to-day or week by week. It's something that I really love. And it's something that I increasingly have noticed I want to double down on, even though it's the least direct line profitable part of my business. I have aspirations to get my 2 shows to sustain themselves. And I don't know, I feel like Jim Carrey in Dumb and Dumber, where it's like, oh, it's nearly impossible to earn a living off your podcast. So you're saying there's a chance.
So you're saying there's a chance.
Exactly. So now I just say author and podcaster of Pivot and Free Time. And technically I have a third book, Life After College, but it doesn't have a whole universe around it the way that Pivot and Free Time do.
Yeah. And your podcast is Free Time as well, right? Or one of your podcasts.
Exactly. Pivot with Jenny Blake, Free Time with Jenny Blake. And the thing is, I do a lot more. I license the IP to companies like Google. I do keynote speaking. I run a private community for heart-based business owners. But I feel like none of that would be happening if it wasn't for the book and now the podcast.
Yeah. And you asked me what I say or my answer to that question. It is really tough. It's one reason I ask on this podcast, because I'm so curious about what people say when they say, what do you do? Because we all do generally so many different things. For me, I've learned it depends on the room I'm in. So if I'm talking with my family who doesn't even quite know what a website is, I'll say I do online business. And sometimes I get a weird look. Sometimes they're like, oh, okay, that's all I need to know. Let me move on. But if I'm talking with somebody who's a little more in the know of like web design, then I can say like, well, I'm a coach. I actually coach people how to build their web design business. I tend to say like podcaster, YouTuber, one layer back. But maybe I'll start shifting that around. You've encouraged me to maybe say podcaster first.
And then there are those people that say, oh, well, you got to give your sizzle, like your elevator pitch. So what do? I help people free their time. But that just sounds so lofty to me. I know that's not really what they're asking. Like, and I don't know, it seems like some people have great success when it's like, what do? I help people present their best selves online. Okay, what do you really do? Oh yeah, I'm a web developer, a web designer,
Right.
And then there's also the answer that if I'm not in the mood to talk. So recently I said, oh, I do corporate training stuff. And that was like, put him right to sleep and he didn't ask another question about it.
That got him out of there. That'll clear the room. Oh, that's good. Well, so where did this idea start for you, Jenny? I don't know. I mean, I've been more recently exposed to your stuff. I actually heard you on my friend and colleague Pat Flynn's podcast, and I loved your interview.
Oh,
and
thank you.
I had heard your name previously, but where did this start for you? Can you just give us a snapshot of maybe your backstory and what led you to this idea of free time being so important?
Well, that is very auspicious because the last time I was on Pat's show, I now have a BFF, Leanne Hughes, who's one of the founding members of the private community. She and I are in close contact with Voxring all the time. And that was thanks to Pat Flynn. So I'm really happy to know that you heard that interview. I love Pat and I love what he's doing. Free time for me, I mean, there's so many factors that converged all at the same time. It really started because the person who had been the right hand in my business for 5 years, I got so lucky. I met her while she was still a junior in college. Taught her everything, helped her build out this book of business so she didn't even need to get a job. And when she was finally ready to move on and she was just moving up in the world, is now the co-founder of her own branding agency, I needed to bring someone new in. And I started getting everything out of my head. Like, what do I want to teach this person about how we operate? And I created a Google Doc. I thought it would just be a one-pager, JBE operating principles. Slowly but surely, just creating the shell, this document, I started adding more and more. I'd be showering, I'd be walking, I'd be on the subway, and I would keep thinking more ways of, well, how do I do business? How do I want other people on my team to think about the work and tackle the work and think about our time? It became 7 or 8 pages. Then I turned it into a 1-hour workshop for my private community. Then I created a mini course, Free Up Founder Time. And a year later, I realized I finally got the courage, basically, to think, to raise my hand and say, yes, I have something to say about business, operational efficiency, systems, and time. And it's kind of intimidating because time itself, who the heck am I to think I have anything to say on this topic that all the best thinkers have wrapped their mind around? But I did see a gap that a lot of business books are really boring. So I kind of wanted to democratize systems thinking and principles of agile development, which a lot of your community are probably familiar with just from being in the back end of web design and development. I think coding is so rewarding because you're problem solving and you're trying to build things to be beautiful and efficient and communicate clearly. And ultimately, I wrote the book because I think that our time is so precious. And I hate seeing, especially fellow business owners, mired in minutia, none of us want that.
Well, you hit an interesting point there with the rewarding aspect of being a web designer. The challenge, though, with my niche and everyone listening primarily is most of us are kind of webpreneurs. So most of us here listening started out as web designers, coding and designing. Then we realized, like myself, oh, I'm suddenly a freelancer. And now I have a business on my hands. And then we try to run the business and do the work. And then the idea of free time is like, oh, that was when you were like 12, right? Because I'm a business owner now. This is why I'm so excited about diving into how to get this back, because that's the problem as entrepreneurs that we all face. And I think I found that it wasn't intentional. It just kind of happened. And I've always been big on work-life balance. And I'm a family man now. I have a wife and 2 daughters, a son on the way. So like I've learned to get my time back. And you talked about, I think on Pat's podcast, about having like a 20 to 25, 30 hour approach. And I think that's plenty as well. But if you don't intentionally set that out, it can just run your life, right? Like it's so hard to just turn it off.
I think it was in E-Myth Revisited, or somebody said it where you quit your job and you don't want to have one boss. So now you have 10 bosses and those are your clients. Client work, especially web design, can be so detail-oriented, labor-intensive. There's a lot of heavy customer service involved because you're dealing with somebody's baby, like their online baby, business baby. And I know I married a designer. He doesn't do that anymore, but I know how much work and let's just say sweat equity goes into this type of service-based business. What you're describing. And I do think if you have kids, you've already gotten a black belt in time and energy management.
Yeah. What
I would say is that if you love, really to me, free time, it's not just about working less and then having all this time for leisure. It's about how do we figure out the things that we actually enjoy, that energize us, that we're uniquely good at, and then design smarter systems and automation and a tiny bit of team support. I'm not someone who even wants a big team, so that we can drop everything else. That's been my obsession, is how do I get out of the way of being the bottleneck in my business? Because when I had a purely service-based business, it terrified me that if I got sick or I wanted a break, my creative process, sometimes I want months off to not interact with anybody, no clients, nobody. The whole business would grind to a halt. So part of systems thinking is also how do you design some of your systems and some of your revenue streams to scale just a little bit, or have subcontractors under you, people you trust, referral partners. There are lots of ways to do this where the pressure is not all on you all the time, 24/7 with no relief. And that's where the systems and the Delightfully Tiny team come in.
That's such a great place to start. Which, side note, was systems thinking like the first title of the book, like draft version 1? Because I could totally see that being a title of a book, but it sounds like a boring book. So I imagine free time's like the antithesis of systems thinking.
I know. It's funny you mentioned that because I don't know if it ever made it into the title, but as I was pivoting, my pivot came out in 2016. And as I was thinking, well, what's next for me? Because the one thing I could guarantee was that I'll be pivoting my whole life. We all will be. I realized like I am obsessed with systems and software. It's the thing that I'm always tinkering with in my business. I actually don't do coaching at all anymore because I like being in the back end of everything. Mm-hmm. So to answer your question, yes, I'm like, if I start talking about systems, people are going to fall asleep. So why am I obsessed with smarter systems and operational efficiency? Why do I love that stuff? Because it can create free time. And that free time becomes a skill. It becomes a verb. It's an ongoing, we can always be getting better at freeing our time, again, as a verb, as a skill, as a practice, as a continual process. And that is so rewarding, because the most rewarding thing is when you learn to think this way, you can take small steps today that will free your time infinitely into the future. And that is what I'm obsessed with.
Yes. And can I just tell you personally, I love that the cover of your book doesn't have like a Mai Tai on a beach kind of vibe.
Right,
it's
or
like
a clock.
Yes, it's a celebration. You got confetti for everyone watching. It's intentional. It's like, it is a celebration. And I encourage my students who are getting time back in their business to do whatever they want to do, whether it's for personal or reinvest in the business or just enjoy life, do what they want to do. That is something to celebrate.
Yes.
But to get there, we got to kind of cover a few steps, and I'm sure we're not going to go through the whole book, but I think you kind of already alluded to the best place to start in my mind, which would be, would you back me up in saying you have to figure out what you're doing in your business and what you want to do? Is that kind of a good starting place for most people?
Yeah. The first thing actually I recommend, the diagnostic, is where are you in friction? Where are you in flow? Because sometimes we, as the saying goes, cannot read the label from inside the jar. Sometimes it's hard to just straight away say, what are my unique talents and gifts to the world? It's hard to answer that. So instead, if you look for friction areas, what is causing the most friction for you right now in life and work? Sometimes it's in life, in running your household. Friction is where you dread something, you're procrastinating, something is draining you, it's dragging you down, it's pulling your focus, your energy, your attention, it's making you anxious. We know what friction feels like. You all know the feeling when you have a client that is joyful, easeful, delightful, and flowing. And we know when you have those nightmare clients that are full of friction, nothing's ever right. They don't even pay on time. And the whole thing is friction A to Z.
They make you sigh when they call. It's like,
oh my God. Yeah. You just want to silence their phone when you see it, or you see that you have a meeting with them and your stomach drops, compared to the clients where you just actually can't wait to get on the phone because they're so joyful. So first step is notice where you're experiencing the most friction. And that's one of the biggest opportunities you have to apply the free time framework. So that's the 3-step process to free your time in that area: align, design, assign.
And I love that too. That's a great challenge, I think, for everyone listening, is maybe like over the course of a week, just write out the tasks that are friction and write the ones that are flow.
Yes.
And then we can go from there. So I guess I didn't really intentionally mean to take us down the exact framework, but yeah, are you cool with diving into that? Like what's in the 3 steps and I guess the question would be, once we figure that out, then what's the next best step? Is it hiring? Is it delegating? You mentioned it. Sometimes it's hard to know your superpowers, especially if you're early on. Like I'm still learning. Like I didn't know I was going to enjoy, and I think do an okay job at interviews and podcasts, but I love it. This is like my favorite thing to do. It's probably pretty obvious, but yes. I didn't know that early on. So yeah, how do we start to kind of then know what we're good at and what to do next?
It would be a pitfall to jump to hiring right away, because this area has friction for a reason. And if it were easy to solve, you all would have solved it by now. I love your idea, Josh. And I do talk about this in the book. I even have a template for it in the toolkit. We can put that in the show notes, that you should track. It's a great idea to track for 2 weeks, even if you do analog style with a pen and paper by your desk. Just every time you notice things big or small that are friction, lukewarm. Oh, I love that you have your notebook.
Yeah, I have a notebook for almost. Yeah.
Yeah. And because it's hard, even in the moment like this, if I asked everybody listening, okay, stop. And what are all the friction points of your business? I'm sure you could rattle off a couple, but you might not get everything. So yes, do that exercise that Josh suggested. The first step is align. Should you be doing this at all? Does it align with your energy, your strengths, and your values? Josh, with your example of podcasting, you didn't know. You're running an experiment. In the align stage, you can go, oh yeah, this gives me so much energy. It aligns with who I am. I love making connections this way. You clearly have strengths and gifts in this area. The gift of connecting, your voice alone is a gift. And your values. This is building community and building thought leadership and building relationships. So you could certifiably say this is aligned. We already knew that because this is not a friction area for you. It's like a joy area. For someone else, they might need to think about, okay, we could even look at your client roster and say, which ones are there friction around? And are they even aligned at all? Is it worth saving that business? Or do you actually want to realign how you talk about what you do so that you dissuade the wrong types of clients? When I used to run my community, the private community, it used to be for side hustlers and solopreneurs. Over time, I started to be much more forward about heart-based business. And I read in a book that the right type of copywriting should disgust people. Some people.
That's scary.
And that's hard for me because I'm a people pleaser. I don't really want to turn anyone off or disgust them. But I'm sure someone could get to my page and just say, heart-based business, give me a freaking break. Like business is about metrics and the bottom line, and then you can do good, and ease and joy. get over yourself. It's about hard work and hustle, so I just imagine those type of people. And I thought to myself, do I care if they're turned off? No. Yay. Right. Good riddance. And when I did this, when I changed the language on my site to be about generosity, heart-based business, etc., I started attracting the coolest people. Like the community.
Awesome.
It only got better. I also raised the prices. I think a lot of business owners charge too low. When I raised the prices, actually more serious people showed up. People who are more committed, who are more generous, who are more active, more present. So it's often counterintuitive, this align stage of taking certain steps to realign. They seem scary in the moment, but they actually really serve you and the business best.
My gosh, I'm starting to take notes. First off, I love that you said dissuade instead of, because I always call it weed out, and that works. It's what I did with clients. I would weed them out, but it does kind of have a negative connotation to it. I love the idea of like the opposite of persuading. Like, I'm persuading you not to go with me. These are my values. This is the kind of business I run. This is the kind of clients I take care of. These are where our price points start at. Totally agree. Raise your rates, everybody. We say it usually every week on the podcast, raise your rates. But the other big thing here, my gosh, messaging and copy, that is so crucial nowadays, especially I think in the world where everyone's online. Like we all know you have a few seconds to grab somebody's attention. You also have that few seconds to dissuade people who are not right. So I love that you talked about that, Jenny, and the results that you got from just making those subtle tweaks. And I'm sure it wasn't a massive website redesign. Perhaps it was probably just some copy differences and stuff. I would imagine that made the big difference. I know it's funny with my podcast here, I'm actually just about to rebrand it. So by the time your episode comes out, I might have already rebranded it, but it's going to be the Web Design Business Podcast with Josh Hall, just to really clarify what we're doing here. But the tagline will stay the same, and that is the result of getting freedom and a lifestyle you love. When I added those two words, well, whatever those two phrases in the description, it really changed my brand. I'm getting people who want freedom, which I think was why everyone's going to be buying your book, Free Time, because it aligns perfectly with what we're all about. And then also a lifestyle you love. Like, the cool thing about web design in particular is you can work where you want, with awesome clients, as long as you dissuade them. And then you can have that time to go to the next step. So a lot of great points there in that first alignment category.
And then it's not that money and time need to be mutually exclusive. I'm all about envisioning how we can be abundant in both. But by emphasizing freedom in your tagline, you're not just going to get people who become angry if you don't teach them how to have a 7-figure web design business overnight. That actually you're going to teach people how to experience freedom and the lifestyle that they want while earning abundantly, but don't get it twisted. Like, you're not here to just learn about how to make money at all costs at the expense of your health and time with your family.
You know what I've found though? This is interesting. I love that you said the 6 or 7 figure range. Like, the reason I don't specifically in most cases say I'll teach you how to build a 7-figure business is because, one, I didn't do that. I built a 6-figure business. So the most I can teach on is that. But also the people who tend to want free time are generally already building that type of business, and now they're trying to get their time back. So I think in a way of like positioning, in our cases, freedom and free time as a value add, that's like attracting the people who are generally already making a certain amount of money, or maybe in the 6-figure range, and they want to get it back. Have you found that as well? Just with that little tweak of copy?
I've just never, I say in the book, how we bake is as important as what we make. And so I really feel strongly about the process being joyful and delightful as much as possible, knowing that business has so many challenges that are inherently built in. But I don't believe in burning myself out or burning things to the ground just so that in 5 years I have a business and then I free my time. I only want to get to 7 figures because I'm not there either. I only want to get there if I'm meant to get there, if it's even for the highest good of all involved, that I get there in a way that's easeful and joyful. I don't plan to just strive for that kind of deadline, because I know I've talked to too many people who say it's not about the money and you'll get there and be just as miserable if you haven't changed your habits and your lifestyle to get you there.
Yes. And we all know the stories of people who get to 7 figures and beyond, but suddenly they don't have relationships with their kids and they're divorced.
Right. And you have regret and you're sick. Yeah.
And you're just fat and unhappy and unhealthy and all the things. Yeah.
Jim Carrie, I love that he said, I wish everybody could get everything they've ever wanted so that they realized it's not it. It's not where happiness comes from. I'm quoting Jim Carrey a lot today.
You know what? I want to watch Dumb and Dumber tonight now. This is getting me pumped up. So that's awesome. Great tips for aligning. Let's glance maybe the second phase. So we're aligned with, what we do, our copy's better, we're attracting the right customers, but then comes I'm sure the next challenge, designing it. All right, let's hit it.
I want to also give you a practical example. So when we talk about the intake process for new clients, we found that I don't do one-on-one coaching anymore, but I have a coaching team for Pivot and for Free Time. And we were noticing a lot of tire kickers. People are getting that my team, that no one works for me full time. They run their own businesses, but they're essentially subcontractors. But they were getting a lot of tire kickers, like a lot of intro calls from people who would never have the budget to invest. So now in the interest form, if you want to do one-on-one coaching, you submit an interest form. The last question asks, are you prepared to invest $9.97 a month for coaching? Somewhere thereabouts. And if they say yes, then they get to the next page of the survey. We use Typeform where they could schedule a 30-minute intro call with a coach. If they say no, we recommend either the group Career Pathfinder program, that's for the Pivot side, or BFF, the private community for business owners on the Free Time side. So we're already saving time in a way from people who may need to filter themselves out, not just with the language of their psychographics, but like what investment they're willing to make, because we don't want there to be surprises either. And so something simple. Yeah, go ahead.
I love that too for web design. Instead of asking like, client, what's your budget? Say, are you willing to invest this much? And it's very intentional. Invest. Right.
Our packages can range from X to Y. Are you prepared? Are we in the same ballpark to even get on the phone? Because some people we know, their idea of web design is like hiring on 99 Designs. And then for other people, they'll spend 6 figures on a website for their business. So that design is about being really intentional. Once you've aligned or realigned, design is about your ideal outcomes, impact, and process before you ever delegate the work or even design the systems around it. What is the ideal outcome of this business area or this project? What impact do you want it to have on your target audience or whoever is going to be experiencing it? And then process is being really intentional about designing how the work flows for optimal ease, joy, and efficiency. Then the third stage is assign, where you try to get as much as you can off your plate.
Okay, that's great. Look, I don't think we need to talk too much more about design because you nailed it, Jenny. All those things are key. And I've talked a lot recently about some of my processes with onboarding. And more recently, we had a whole episode dedicated to web design onboarding that really is in alignment with this, which is basically once you dissuade people, like to funnel them somehow to make sure if we're even going to take time to chat that you are, a qualified lead versus somebody questionable like that tire kicker who we probably are just not a good fit. So let's just not even get on a call. That was a killer for time for me early on as a web designer. I was doing so many calls with people and I didn't really understand my value. And then they were wanting a $250 website. And I just was like, oh, it wasn't a good fit. And now we just wasted an hour and a half and I gave you a bunch of free strategy and design tips and see you later. So a lot of that is crucial in design. I love that. I have some other questions in and around this, but let's go to number 3 and then maybe we can kind of go back around all this. So yeah.
I'll even make it quick. Assign is on purpose because a lot of business owners resist assigning. And so this is on purpose, that it's part of the framework. It's not an afterthought. How can you double how much you delegate? Who will do what by when? Those are the 3 parts of assign. And I really encourage everybody to get creative. It doesn't matter if you're delegating stuff about running your household. It doesn't matter. Maybe you're delegating somebody who sends all the communications with your clients, like the invoices, scheduling, where you are in the process, and then you focus solely on the design elements. You don't have to do as much as you think you do. And in contrast to thinking that, your clients will be so disappointed if you have an assistant helping you schedule or send invoices or anything at all, it actually conveys more professionalism. They feel more taken care of. And that way it's not all on you to be the creative and as Gino Wickman calls it, the integrator, the one keeping the trains running on time. It's hard to do everything and do it well. So I would really, this is where assign, get creative. How much can you possibly get off your plate so that you can do more and more and more of your best work?
And I think going through that like friction or flow list would help with this, because you can decide what tasks do you want to do and what do you not want to do. And I actually, we talked about Pat Flynn earlier. So he's a mentor of mine. I've had him on this podcast. I've been on his, and he was a key helper in me with getting podcast editing off of my plate. And it's not because it was a friction item for me. It wasn't a time perspective, because podcast editing is we're doing video too. It's time consuming, but I liked it. And he didn't tell me like, dude, you have to stop editing. But I just listened to him talk about his experience with getting his time back by hiring out editing. And that's what hit me. It made me realize this is one thing that even though I enjoy doing it, it's not serving my audience. I can find somebody who can do it better, and I can hire this off. And then as soon as I did, suddenly my show really started to go to the next level, because I could focus on talking and asking better questions and just honestly being more like energetic during calls, instead of being like, oh, I got to get this call wrapped up. I got a bunch of other stuff to do. So have you seen that too? Like sometimes even though you enjoy work, you have to be careful on what you take on and what you pass off.
I have the same thing as you. I love audio editing, actually. I really enjoy it. It's soothing. It's a nice sense of accomplishment. My aha moment around that came when I was spent all day on a Saturday editing a couple episodes. And so I probably put in 6 hours that day, and I realized, shoot, like my book is launching in a month and a half. There's so much of the business backend that I could be building right now. The products, there's a free time operations dashboard that hadn't been built yet, not to mention half the launch emails that would support the book launch. So I realized, even though I enjoy this, when I was staying too involved with the editing, that's all I did all day, all week, was prepare for interviews, conduct them, edit, prepare show notes. And I had assistants along the way, but no one conceptually owned the podcast. I was still the owner in my mind. Like I was still the one that if I messed up, the show didn't go out. Finally, when I hired a team, it was one of the best investments I've made. And it was scary for me because it was the most money I had ever paid somebody on a monthly retainer. But now, same as what Pat has talked about his journey, now I really do just show up and do the interview, and I can focus on the rest of my business. And like you said, I'm more energized during the rest of the week. So even though I enjoy the skill of audio editing and getting better at it, I actually wasn't getting anything else done in my business. So it's kind of bittersweet, but I will say I do hang on to like Notion. I geek out in Notion. I love building things, and that is like Legos to me. So I don't give that up.
And I've learned, because I come from a graphic design background, and I still do a lot on my website, but I've learned that I'll still dip my toe in design. But what I've learned to do is for example, I just revised some of our social media graphics and templates and the YouTube thumbnails for a lot of stuff. I designed those, but then I make an SOP that Nathan, my editor, follows and my team can follow to kick those out and do them on the regular. So I still get my design, needs met, but somebody can do it every week. I don't have to do it every week. So it's kind of one thing I've learned.
I'm doing an episode on that any day now. It comes out on train the system, then the person. So do 1.5 times the work now first as you get it set up. Like you said, redesigning or designing something from scratch, and then create the process around it. And then the system itself gets smarter before you hand it off to the person.
That's great. And I've realized over the years, there's a term that I don't think is important enough in business, or at least it's not talked about enough. And that is priority. I've really learned, especially in this business, when it comes to all the different things I can do, I have to look at the priority items. Like, I hate to say the typical corporate quote of like, what's going to move the needle forward, but it's true. There are certain things that a business just like, they are more important tasks for moving the business. It doesn't mean that some of the other tasks are not important. They're also things that only I could do. Like in my business right now, who's going to interview Jenny Blake? Me, Josh, I'm going to interview you. So this is what I need to focus on. And the editing can be done by somebody else. What are your thoughts on priority and and does it go back to what we've talked about so far with this whole framework? Will that help figuring out what those priority items are?
The framework I love is from Todd Herman. He calls it the entrepreneur scorecard. You look at what are your $10 tasks, $100 tasks, $1,000 tasks, and $10,000 tasks. And try every day that the first thing you tackle when you have your best energy is a $10,000 task. So I remember one day I was in a coffee shop and I had a couple hours to work. I could either answer email, or in that moment, I, in Canva, designed a Pivot Programs PDF that could be a tool to sell licensing to companies, which is a 6-figure contract. And I felt so happy because I picked a $10,000 task. I got it done in one working session and got it live on my website. And it felt so good to do that. So I think priority can be kind of ambiguous. And certainly you've learned to prioritize with 2 kids and one on the way. But I like to think about what is the highest possible ROI, the $10,000 task that if I did this one thing, like I just wrote to the podcast team today and I said, moving forward, I'd like to make room for 6 ad spots instead of 4. To me, that's a $10,000 task, because if my show, the audience grows as I hope to do, and I can increase the ads, like it just has maybe it's not exponential, but it has a snowball effect that will support everything else. So that's how I try to think about what to work on. Like what are the biggest leverage points that, as you said, if I got this done, and this is where the book, The One Thing, is so good too. Like, what is the one thing that if you tackled it today would make the biggest impact on your business, or would make the biggest impact in getting you out of the way as the bottleneck?
Yeah. Oh gosh, absolute gold, Jenny. I love it. I feel like I'm just so aligned with you with where we're at in business and in our lives. And listen, I usually ask my guests where they're based out of. You're in New York City because you mentioned Subway. This kind of leads to something I wanted to ask you about. Hey, the Big Apple. New Yorkers are hard workers. I have family who live in Jersey, so it's like a whole different type of person. I'm in Columbus, Ohio, right now. So we're Midwestern. Like, we work hard, but we like some time off. We'll take, we chill, and it's a more moderate approach to life day to day. New York is often very different. Have you always lived in New York, and the reason I'm asking about this is because of work ethic and hustle, which I want to get into, but yeah.
I don't know. Those Midwestern values, the work ethic is so strong. And as are I have one great friend who lives in New Jersey, and she's also amazing, like corporate attorney by day, estate sales by weekend. The funny thing about New York, yes, it's the city that never sleeps, but in order just to live here at all, I find that it's been so important for me these last 11 years to create a really quiet home, peaceful home, not to work too much. Like, the city itself is already so charged and electric. It can be tiring just to walk the dog. I mean, just to take a little Ryder out for a walk means having 10 conversations possibly, and walking over some crazy stuff in the street and having some wild interactions. And it's like, it is not calming the way that my friend, she would say, gosh, I would take my dog for a walk and we don't see a single person, and it's peaceful and I connect to nature. So I actually find that I personally have developed a lot more spaciousness in order to live in New York, but I love being in New York because I love the collision of people and ideas, and you just get smashed into these subway cars with everybody. And I just love who you can bump into walking down the street, and conferences, restaurants, culture. Like, I just thrive with that.
That's awesome.
That's how I balance it out.
I guess I should say too, to clarify my statement, being in Columbus, it's Midwestern. Yes, we do work very hard, but we turn it off at night. And I think when you're in the city that never sleeps, I think that probably breeds in this idea of just you work just nonstop. At least for my
grandma. I think if you come visit New York, a lot of people get exhausted just coming for a week because you're like out all day, you're walking 10 miles a day, you're trying to get in all the stuff. But then living here, there's ways to make it more sustainable.
I could see that. My wife and I visited my family out in Jersey, and then we went into the city for a day, and my hips have never hurt so bad.
I know.
And I had no money back then, so we didn't take a cab. We just walked everywhere. Same thing though. It was awesome, but it was definitely exhausting. Yes. So it makes sense as a visitor to be like that. But this does lead to this idea of like hustle and hard work. I'm all about hard work. I have some different thoughts about hustle. What are your thoughts on hustle culture? And have you seen a change in the landscape with how hustle was viewed in entrepreneurship?
I've been rejecting hustle culture for 11 years. Like, that's as long as I've been in business. I worked at Google. I worked at a startup before that. I burned out so many times. Just again, it's no one's fault at those companies. Like no one, usually there's not some evil overlord who says like, let's burn everybody out to the ground. But the pace is just so fast. And again, like I think a 40 or 50 hour work week is pretty grueling on our bodies. And especially if that's 5 days a week. So no, I'm long past hustle culture. It just simply doesn't work for me. I actually will get sick. I hate the phrase, I'll sleep when I'm dead. That's so stupid. Like sorry,
you'll die a lot sooner. That's for sure.
I don't like to call anybody stupid. I just mean that, Liz, I think there's like 5% studies show that of people who actually need less than 8 hours of sleep. And that small 5%, I think my mom might be one of them. And I met someone at a party the other day who said she works 12-hour days. And I said, listen, are you one of those people that actually feels energized after just 4 or 5 hours of sleep? And she goes, yeah, that's me. I have so much energy. I don't know what to do with it. And so
not me.
Me either. I need 8 solid hours, sometimes 9. I never get 9, but that's what it would be amazing. And if I don't get that, I'm cranky. I'm not as creative. I forget my words. I don't do anywhere near my best work. So I think if you're a business owner, your body is your business. Your body is your best vehicle. We all should pretend we're driving Maseratis around here because that is our moneymaker, is our health and our ability to think strategically and creatively.
That's a great point. I think that's often overlooked with the idea of working hard and hustling, is that you can only do that so long before burning out, and everyone is going to burn out if you're hustling nonstop. It's just a matter of time. Some people can tend to go a little longer than others, but I've found in different industries that I was a part of, like I had a friend, I used to be a cabinet maker for a tour bus customizing shop. Cool. And I had this friend who worked all day and then worked at night, and then worked all day and then worked at night and then worked on the weekends. And I'm like, I felt like a lazy piece of crap because I was not working literally 24/7. But then it dawned on me years later, like, how long can he do this? He might die at 40. Also smoking 8 packs a day. Like he might literally die at 40. So that term, like I'll sleep when I'm dead, I've always felt like, yeah, you're going to die pretty quick if you kill yourself hustling so much. So,
right. Or you won't have relationships. You won't have other things that are energizing and rewarding. I also, when you're a business owner, what's hard is to work less. It's easy to just put in brute strength and sweat equity. It's actually harder to work less, to have the time that you spend at your desk or at your laptop. That's harder. So I guess how I even define hard work, I don't believe in hard work for the sake of it. Even if you're a business owner, I want my work to feel easeful, joyful, flowing, fun. And if it's not, there's something wrong. And I look to fix it.
I think being intentional too about hard work. And because look, there are seasons. Like I'm sure when you're writing the book and the book launch, I would imagine that was a season of maybe either a little more work than usual or some hard work. But for me, I've learned it's not ongoing. Like if I do a course or a big thing, I let my family know, I let my wife know I'm hustling a little bit right now. This is, it's hard work time, or a little more work than usual, but the few weeks after that is very different, normal, slower pace. What are your thoughts on hustling in spurts? Like, and to your question, like, do you still hustle for a short amount of times, but then cut it off? Have you learned to just, cut that off?
Yeah, I think it's true because I did an episode on this too, where it's like, it's as if you're running a marathon. I've only run one marathon in my life, like probably slower than a grandma can run it, but I ran, I didn't walk. And there are moments where you hit the wall and you're exhausted, but you see the finish line and you just know it's going to be worth it. And even you get to the final mile and you want to like sprint through the finish. And I did feel that with this, even though it was my third book launch. I always try not to complain and I try not to burn out, but you're right. The nature of the beast sometimes is you also want to sprint through the finish. And like, I found myself, I was tired. I did come down with an ear infection and I knew that I was like ready to rest soon, but I also wanted to to get through the stuff that I had and just give it everything I had to get over that finish line and know that I had really given it my best shot. So I'm with you. I do have that relationship to work as well, where again, I don't ever want it to be like sort of toxic hard work where, oh, I'm such a martyr. Like, oh, I've toiled for this book for all of you. No. And I will still stretch myself past some of my edges sometimes just to know that I gave it everything I had.
And I always found as a course creator, I've created 10 courses in my span so far. And I've realized looking back, there was always like a drop off after a launch, because typically you would think like you've done all this work over the, several weeks or a couple months, you launch this course, students are coming in, you're getting paid well. If it goes really well, it's like, this should be the moment where you're like, I'm on cloud 9. For me, it was the opposite. For me, after every course launch, I was like, oh, I got nothing. Have you experienced that as well? And maybe that was because of that season of hustle. It's like, and now I've learned to plan like the week after a course launch, let's chill, maybe a couple calls, light schedule, but it's, easy week after that.
I'm a big fan of that too. Even knowing a launch is coming, block off 2 weeks later, right from the get-go, knowing that your future self is going to thank you for it. And yes, I call it like the furry rest monster starts to beckon from the couch, the kind from Monsters Inc., the big blue furry friendly one. So it's friendly, but it's like, you will come to me to the couch and I like cannot resist. I feel glued to the couch. And that does definitely happen after a launch, especially for me too. I love doing stuff like this. I genuinely love it. And I'm super introverted. So most of the time I'm reading, I'm quiet, I'm behind the scenes. Even writing the book was super joyful because I could just be this hermit, this like antisocial hermit. And then the launch was all this external energy, all this like talking, conversations and events, conferences. And again, all that stuff was really fun. It's just not my natural default mode. Yeah. So I also found myself at the end of the day, it's like, whew, okay, now I got to really recharge.
That's good to know. I think it's good to be self-aware about that. My wife and I were just talking about this last night because we differ to where people tend to energize me. And while she loves hosting and doing parties and stuff, it wipes her out. Like if we do a party on a Saturday night, Sunday is nothing, and there better be nothing. I learned early on, do not plan anything after a party night because the next day needs to be nothing. She needs that time to re-energize. It's just the way she's wired. So I think being self-aware about that, but like practically just planning your weeks and your projects, I think it's really important. And then like we were just talking about when in regards to free time, you have to plan it, right? I know we're getting close on time here, so we can wrap this up, Jenny, but you have to plan it. Like this has to be intentional, right? Otherwise you could work 24/7 on your laptop.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what are the trade-offs you're willing to make? So when I'm working on a really big project or a big launch, I'm not the most responsive with email, let's say. So I think it's also just, you don't have to do everything and you don't have to do everything well. So what are the things that you really care about? And then what are the things you're willing to drop or delegate, even if it's not going to be done perfectly by someone else, that you're willing to get some help on for the sake of the bigger picture?
I love that. What's something that you delegated? And I'm just asking you this purely as almost like a little free coaching time with Jenny. What's something that you delegated that really just made a difference in your business?
Oh, let's see. In my business. Yes. Well, I used to think that I had to be the one to have the exploratory calls with big corporate clients, like whether they wanted me to come in for a keynote speech or even licensing. I thought I should be the one to respond to their email inquiry and set up time with them and talk to them about what I do. And that was the last thing I was willing to give up until I realized that I was really conveying that I'm a one-woman shop. And people were negotiating with me in ways that made me uncomfortable and almost angry. Like, who do these people think they are, just negotiating every price I would set? And then I realized, and someone gave me this advice as well, saying, if you're the thought leader, it's really hard to just be this like tough bulldog negotiator. It's actually very beneficial to have someone else in between. So now someone on my team is the first person to respond to an inquiry. It doesn't matter if it's coming from Google. She'll be the one to respond. She's the one that coordinates scheduling. And in fact, for a lot of keynote speaking now, I don't get on the phone. until you've paid an invoice. Like, there's enough of me out there now in the world that it's not like I get on the phone willy nilly. Sometimes I would have clients that say, great, let's do a weekly sync between now and the event. So I got really clear that if you hire me for a speaking event, there's a 30-minute pre-event strategy session and a 30-minute post-event strategy session that removes any confusion about how many times we're going to meet and for how long. And then, by the way, because I haven't gotten on the phone with them during let's call it the sales process, it's actually really special when we're on the phone together. We get so much done during that time.
Yeah.
They feel special, like, oh yes, Jenny's here, because I haven't been so ever present with every other tiny detail throughout the process.
That's a good point. It makes you look like a rock star. It's like, I've been talking to Jenny's assistant. Now Jenny's here talking. Holy cow.
And it just shows that I value my time and that I am actually only showing up once you're committed.
Well, and look, in web design, this is a massive point that you're hitting on. And that is, you got to set boundaries and communication constraints from the get-go. Otherwise, to no fault of their own, clients will dictate it and they will run the show. Like, I learned this early on. I became essentially a 24/7 support person for all my clients until I just found myself answering calls all day and I couldn't get my stuff done and I couldn't market. I couldn't go out to networking events and stuff. So I learned I had to set those boundaries, and I had to tell clients, like, here's the days I do calls. Here's when I do calls. If there's an emergency, let me know, of course, but I have these time segments and you can book a call, or they're going to be and it adds more, like, instead of just kind of just chatting for 45 minutes. It's like, we got half an hour. Let's go. What do we need to get done? I love that approach.
Yeah. It got to the point when I was doing coaching that I only took calls on Thursdays. And as it currently stands, I have a do not schedule recurring block the fourth week of every year. It just is always blocked off, do not schedule. So the fourth week of every year, August and mid-December to mid-January, it's recurring. So I don't even have to think about it next year, blocking it off. It's already blocked, Mondays and Fridays as well. So the only times that are available are between 11 and 3, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but not even Wednesday, because that's for podcasting. So
nice.
Yeah. I think it is getting really clear with all that stuff. Lets people know, great. You can just where they slot in. No, most people, it's not that urgent that they need the call to be on a Monday.
So true. So true. And you practice what you preach. It was interesting when I reached out through your website to your team. First of all, it was a team member who got back with me and set it up. And then when I went to book through your link, you only had a couple slots available. And I believe the next month was like completely clear. So I was like, okay, Jenny isn't messing around. She really does not take calls all day, Monday through Friday. So she practices what she preaches. So,
and we had we had a lot of team turnover, ironically enough, during the entire time of the launch. It was interesting what you just said about scheduling this interview, because some people, there might be a temptation. Well, cram as many in as possible right around the book launch. But I knew I was going to get tired. And then what happens is I'm not as excited to show up. So I appreciate your patience. And here we are, we're recording this a month and a half after the launch, but there's part of me that I just kind of remind myself, there's no rush. Yes, sure. Let's have some episodes go live right when the book launches, but it's okay if not everything is happening at the exact same time and things slowly roll out. It's always perfect timing.
Here's my new strategy. I'm going to just pull the curtain up. I like the idea of like coming in on the second wave for interviews. That's because so cool. You're not burned out. Like, I'm sure you get tired of talking about the same framework over and over and over. If you're doing 8 interviews a day, which I'm sure you didn't that many, but there is that. And even though you love the topics, I know this, you just get a little tired of talking about the same thing over and over. So I kind of like this idea. I think we just came up with something here, Jenny. I'm going to be like the second wave of podcast interviews intentionally. I like that idea.
I love it. Well, then you have the benefit of asking what has surprised you about the launch. What do most podcasters not think to ask you about your book? You can really like work that second wave of interesting questions, because like, what do people miss that you wish they would ask you about?
Side hustle I got going on now, the second wave podcaster. See, now you done just screwed my free time today, because now I'm going to start thinking about this. Well, Jenny, this has been awesome. I want to be respectful of your time. This has been a very quick hour. I
agree. Wow. This is so fun. You. Happy to do it again anytime.
Oh, I would love to do a round 2 for sure. To wrap this up, where would you like people to go? I mean, obviously you got the free time book that we're going to be linking in the show notes, your podcast. Is there a certain place that you'd like people to go to connect with you and to go more?
I was going to say, after you've actually read the book, we'll do round 2 and you can tell me what,
I would love that.
Jumped out. Yeah.
I would love to do that.
Listeners, you can look for Free Time with Jenny Blake wherever you're listening to this show. And itsfreetime.com/toolkit is where you'll get a bunch of free resources that go with a lot of the concepts we've talked about. If you're interested in the private community, that's at itsfreetime.com/BFF.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll have those links, particularly the toolkit. That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
So we'll have those links. Jenny, thank you so much for your time. Again, I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you for joining, and I'm looking forward to round 2.
Thank you so much, Josh. And big thanks to everybody who's here listening and watching.
Hey guys and gals, just wanted to pop in with a couple things before you head out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this podcast. I would love to hear your feedback, and it will also help other web designers find the show. Be sure to check out the show notes for this episode. Just go to joshhall.co, click on podcasts, and search this episode number, and you'll find all the links, descriptions, and resources we talked about. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, and you'll be notified when the next episode is live. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys on the next episode.